and their health. And obviously nothing's more important than that. It's the social distancing is awkward. I have 2 older kids and 2 little ones. My older kids are bored to death. I keep telling them bored is better than sick. Okay. All right, we got lots of people coming in. The amazing thing is the increase in facial hair and such. I actually shaved because I had a photo shoot earlier today, but ordinarily I may have been confused for I don't know what I'd be confused for, a rabbi perhaps, but I was growing it out. Looks like Gabe is looking pretty hairy there. Like that. It's a good look. Nice. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So today's 3 Ring Circus webinar, it's going to be a fun and a little bit different experience than we've had in the past. Well, we're certainly open to take questions about any topic related to public speaking. As always, we really want to dedicate the bulk of today's session around book publishing. And so I'm going to give a little bit of a preamble, and then we're going to invite our friend and partner, Naren, to join us from Amplify Publishing. So I know many of you on the call today, and those that may be listening afterwards, are authors. Some of you are wildly successful authors, multi-time New York Times bestselling authors, and other of you are maybe just considering for the first time writing a book. So today's discussion is going to cover the entire gamut. There's no right or wrong starting point. We're all in our own different spots, but we're going to try to provide a really honest look at the overall book publishing landscape. We're going to take a look at everything from the mechanics of getting a book deal. What are the different types of publishing options? Is it something you want to do on your own or get some support, whether it's writing support or research support? We're going to talk about marketing and publicity. We're going to dispel any myths that may be out there. And we'll have a lot of time for open fireside chat dialogue. My goal today, and I know Naren's goal as well, is just make sure that everybody has the most no BS understanding of the pros and cons of writing a book, what it really takes to get something written out the door and to be successful. And of course, then the subsequent impact that it can have on your speaking career. I will say this, 15, 20 years ago, I think having a book, unless you were like a Hall of Fame athlete, was probably the ante to play. If you wanted to be a thought leader out there speaking professionally, you kind of needed a book. Today, I think you need to be a thought leader producing original content, but I think you have some choices. So whether that manifests in a 275-page hardcover book, or whether that manifests as a podcast or a blog or a video series or a network television show. So I do want to say that while I am a big fan of writing books, in fact, I'm working on a new one right now. I've written 3 in the past, and that's the subject of today. I just want to make sure that everyone should make their own decision on what's best for them. So if you want to pursue this, we're going to give you all the tools to do so. But if you don't choose to, that's okay also. It's going to be an informal and hopefully comprehensive discussion. So with that in mind, I'm so excited to welcome our dear friend and partner, Naren from Amplify Publishing. I got to know the team at Amplify over the last year or so. One of our dear friends who's actually on the call today, 3 Ring Circus alum Stephen Shapiro, recently published a book through Amplify. And I had lunch with him in Orlando, and he was like, had this like big Cheshire cat, like Kool-Aid smile when he was talking about the folks at Amplify. And I'll say from experience, that's a rare thing. It's sort of like if you had a builder build your house, you're usually not happy about talking to them. It's more like ending in a lawsuit. And unfortunately, that's how publishing can be. But Amplify, I think, is a different type of company, and Naren's a different type of leader. So we're going to get into the meat of it, get ready for a lively discussion, and a big welcome to our partner in crime, Naren at Amplify. Welcome.
Thank you, Josh. Great to be here. Good to meet everybody virtually. And I also shaved for this, by the way.
Wow.
Put on a collared shirt just for all you people.
That's a big step for a guy like you. Man,
I know.
Impressive.
Thank you.
All right, so collared shirt and all. Maybe we'll just start, if you don't mind, just to give us a little sense of what Amplify is all about. And not a commercial, but just to understand, like, how long you've been around, what's your focal point, what type of authors do you work with, just to kind of set the baseline.
Sure. So I got my start in the world of publishing back in 2003. So we've been doing this now for 17 plus years. And Amplify is an imprint of our parent company, which is Mascot Books. And at Amplify, and under the Mascot imprint, we publish all genres, anything from children's books to cookbooks. But where we've really seen the largest growth is in the last 2 or 3 years with our thought leadership practice. And we've done so under the Amplify imprint. And at Amplify, we publish books for thought leaders across all industries, from political titles to a ton of business titles, to current affairs, to self-help. And these are folks that, like the folks on this call, that are thought leaders in various industries and have something important to say and value saying it in a professional, in the most professional manner. And we are 30 professionals strong, located in Herndon, Virginia, and we handle most of our work in-house. Anything from book production, book design, editing and ghostwriting. We bring contractors on board, and we also have a marketing and distribution service that we do all in-house. So that's a little bit about me. And I got one of my teammates here, Hobbs Allison. I see his little square. So that's a little bit about me. And like Josh said, we got to know each other about a year ago. And since that time, we've had the great pleasure of working with Steven Shapiro, Paul Epstein. We're working on his project right now. And Kaiser and Sarah, we're in the middle of a project with them as well. So it's great to be here. Thank you, Josh.
Cool. So, and just to be clear, I keep saying partners because I view you as partners, but we don't own a piece of the company or anything like that. So our partnership, when we say partnership, is because we think you have a lot of value to add, not because we're owners in your company. So I just want to make sure that was clear. But so Naren, can you give us a sense of the different, just in the macro sense to start, the different options that an author may have? There's the traditional publishing route, people like Crown and Random House and such. There on one end, there's raw self-publishing on the other end, where you can sort of upload a file and you're a quote-unquote author. And then there's sort of a hybrid in the middle. Can you kind of take us through at least in the macro sense, those three options, and just to set the stage so people can understand what the publishing world might look like?
Sure. So let's start with traditional publishing. And I know that there's experienced authors on this call, so I'm just going to keep this at the high level, and I welcome questions. Traditional publishing is typically one of the large publishing houses in New York. And if you want to try to get a deal through one of the large publishing houses in New York, you have to use a literary agent. The literary agent's job is to represent your book and to sell it to a large house. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is something called pure self-publishing, and that really emerged in force when Amazon came into prominence. And self-publishing, of course, is you've got the content, you can upload the content, and you can be published in a matter of hours, really. There's pros and cons to both sides of the spectrum. Now, I know a ton of authors that have been very successful in self-publishing, and more authors are being successful self-publishing. And so where we fall is somewhere in the middle. We are a hybrid publishing company. And what that means is there are elements of both self-publishing on one hand and traditional publishing in what we do. We have a submission process, so we don't work on every project that comes into our door. It's got to have something that we feel like we can add value to in an editorial perspective, and that we can help bring to market successfully in terms of marketing and distribution. So at the highest level, again, pure self-publishing over here, traditional publishing over here, and in the space between is something called hybrid publishing, and we're really one of the first companies to play in that space.
Yeah, so just sharing some personal experiences. My first couple books were traditional publishing, and there, as you mentioned, there's pros and cons, and maybe we should look at the pros and cons of each. So I'll just share personally. So those two books were successful. It was great, and we got international deals and all that kind of stuff. But it was a process. I mean, first of all, you have to write a book proposal, which is essentially like writing a business plan. So that's like a 40-page book proposal. It takes, it doesn't take 5 minutes. It takes like several months. Then you have to get a literary agent to represent you. Again, not easy. So you have to like beg and plead to get an agent to take you on. Then you have an agent, and then they shop you to all these different publishers. So then I went to LA and I went to New York, and I like did all this stand-up. I'm essentially pitching my idea. So that doesn't take overnight either. So by the elapsed time that you eventually get an offer from a commercial publisher, you could be 6, 7 months, a year into the project. The second thing that those traditional publishers do is that they take forever. So even from the time you turn your manuscript in, you're talking 6 to 12 months after your manuscript is complete before that book is out the door. So the upside of a commercial publisher is that you perhaps have a big brand name, so it adds some credibility. Maybe they're going to help you with things like foreign rights deals and such. But it is a slow and clunky process that there are a number of steps along the way that can derail you. The other thing I'll say from my own personal experience is I didn't feel that my commercial publisher added that much value, frankly, on any front. Not to be disparaging, but like they added a little bit of editorial value, but it wasn't like I was partners in crime with them writing every word. You know, they polished it up at the end a bit, but it wasn't like they were doing massive writing support. You know, they gave me a couple of cool book cover designs and we tweaked it, but it wasn't like, you know, mind blowing. And then on the marketing front, I, as the author, did most of the marketing. Again, they did a good job internationally, but domestically, it was really on me. So that's the pros and cons of commercial publishing. Going the way the other direction, the thing I worry about self-publishing, pure raw self-publishing, is that first of all, you're competing in a pond where there's a lot of bad quality. So the author who's got 85 spelling errors and doesn't know how to complete a sentence and is just spouting off stupid cliches can get their book self-published, you know, by the end of the day. So as a result, just being in that camp may not set you off in the best light. And further, those really raw self-publishing deals offer like no support. So no one's going to even read your transcript. No one's going to give you editorial support. No one's going to help you with a marketing plan. No one's going to think about how does this book fit into your overall speaking career or other aspects of your thought leadership life. So to me, and again, I don't mean to be too salesy, but folks in that middle category like Amplify, I think it's the Goldilocks principle, sort of not too hot, not too cold, just right. Like, was that Goldilocks? No. Who was that? Was that Goldilocks? No. Little Red Riding Hood. It's a Little Red Riding Hood, just right. And so the thing I worry about in either of those camps is that one might underrepresent you and one might be too slow and clunky, whereas Amplify and publishers like that in the middle might be a good fit. You can get to market quickly, keep a higher percentage of your royalties, have real support in terms of editorial and marketing and publicity and design, but at the same time be able to move much more fluidly and quickly than the big guys and also move more professionally than raw self-publishing. So that's my view, but Naren, what is wrong or right about that? Do you agree with that or what did I miss?
No, you're spot on, actually. And the one thing that I'd really reiterate or emphasize, I should say, about traditional publishing is they're looking for folks with massive platforms. They're looking with folks with massive platforms with a track record of selling books. And you know, if this is your first book, or even if your second book and you don't have this massive platform, you know, it just may not be an option for you, and that's okay, right? And so there's a lot of really good content that wants to go through the traditional channel that there is no home in the traditional channel for that content. And so, you know, when I hear from an author that is set on getting a traditional deal, my advice is always the same: please try it. Please try it. And if you can get it, then by all means, you know, you should consider it as an option. Understand that getting a traditional deal doesn't mean you can, you know, wipe your hands clean and say, okay, I got a traditional deal, I'm going to let them do all the work. Not the case. Every single book, whether it's published by Simon & Schuster, Amazon, or Amplify, the author must be engaged in the marketing. And so, you know, again, for the traditional channel, it's an investment just to get up to the plate, to take a swing. You have to, again, find the agent and then find the right publishing house that is interested in the type of content you're producing.
A couple other points on it, and I agree. I'm glad that we're saying, because I don't think any one of these are wrong, by the way. So you should do whatever's right for you individually. I'm a little biased toward the middle one because, you know, sometimes you think, oh, if you have a big publisher, it's sort of like, hey, I'm done. Like the limo is going to show up at my door and I'm going to go off, have a big closing dinner, and like my book sales are going to soar and I just sit back and, you know, smoke cigars and drink wine. That is not the case. So I know personally people who had traditional publishing deals with top 5 publishers that sold far fewer books than people who publish in other categories. So just because you get a publishing deal doesn't necessarily mean you're going to sell a ton of copies. Also, the economics you might think are way better in the traditional publishing, not necessarily. So Naren, again, I'll share in my layman's view of it, my perspective. I'd love for you to elaborate. But so the way traditional publishing deal often works is that after your literary agent shops the deal, you're going to get an advance and a deadline. So you're going to get a little bit of an advance, and that advance is going to be dependent on, you know, previous stuff that you've done in your career. And so now you got a little bit of money in your pocket. That's awesome. But keep in mind, that's an advance. It's not a bonus. In other words, you got to pay it back. So let's say you get an advance. I'm just going to make up a number, $20,000. That's great and all, but at some point, when the royalties start coming in, that $20,000, you're like $20,000 in the hole to that publisher. So you got to earn your way out of that advance before you start to share any royalties at all. In the middle category where Amplify sits, you're likely not going to get an advance. I don't know if you ever even do advances, but you're not starting in the hole. And the other thing, though, is that your percentage, your royalty percentage, is generally better in the middle category, the Amplify category, or even the self-publishing category than it is with a traditional publisher. So in other words, if you sold 5,000 books at the exact same price, you're going to make more money per book if you're in either the hybrid category or the self-publishing category than you would at the traditional category. So it's something to keep in mind. Yeah, you might get an advance, but you got to pay it back, and your overall royalty structure is lower generally in those larger publishers. Naren, what did I miss? Is that correct?
That is correct. But one thing I'll emphasize is the large advances are no longer plentiful. So when we're talking about an advance, I mean, if you're getting a $20,000 advance these days, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. They're saving the six-figure advances for the celebrities and the people that go by one name, right? And so like Oprah, and so it's just not out there. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And again, we keep reiterating the same point. We're not saying one's bad, one's good, but these are the things that you should really know about if you want to try to get a traditional publishing deal.
Awesome. And also I'm not trying to bash anybody. There are widely successful authors in all three of those camps. One concern that I would have if I were you, that I'd ask, let's say you're going to explore all three, for example, which probably you should. Let's say you get a deal with Crown. The idea that you are going to get the A team at Crown when they are publishing whatever, Michelle Obama's book or something, that may not be the case. So I personally, you might say, well, not only which publisher are you getting, but which people inside the publisher are you getting? Are you working with the senior people that have the deepest experience? Or are you working with the new college grads this is their first book project? So that's another consideration to keep in mind. So switching gears, now help us understand the quality differences. Obviously, traditional publishing is going to be high quality. Obviously, you guys and the people in the middle hybrid offer high quality, but maybe help us understand the quality differences perhaps between the hybrid publisher and self-publishing.
Sure. Again, we keep having these caveats, right? Self-publishing is absolutely fine, and a lot of people are successful self-publishing. However, if you've never produced a book, if you have no experience in editorial or design, that's a real problem. And if you're the general contractor for this book construction process, it's oftentimes that you'll see pitfalls along the way that will show up in the final book product. And at the end of the day, that might undermine your credibility. And as we started this conversation off with, building credibility and building your platform, that's why you do a book in the first place. So I've seen that time and time again. Some people, if they're going to do self-publishing right, they're going to hire experts to do editing and design. So when the product finally is published, it does look like a professional piece of work that you can be proud of.
I think it's really important because if all you were worried about is the book itself, it's one thing, but we're trying to build our brands to be considered for large fee speaking engagements. And if your book is sloppy, if it looks like it was, a middle school project, that's going to really reflect poorly on you. And don't forget, a book is something that's permanent. It's not a blog post. So this is going to be like in the Library of Congress with your name on it. Like your grandkids are going to know about this book. So you want to put your best foot forward. My mom's first cousin, funny enough, whom I love, by the way, he's a very funny guy. But he writes like some submission in some trade journal once every couple months. And he says to himself one day, I'm going to write a book. So he literally copies 14 or 15 of these little submissions that he's done over the years, slaps them together in a Word document, invents like in some automated front cover generator thing for his cover design. And like 24 hours later, he's like, yeah, I'm a published author. I looked at that book. I love the guy, but like that was not a good book. I mean, it didn't have the thoughtfulness and care. And I worry that because we do live in a disposable content society, blog posts or podcasts or whatever quick, I just really encourage people to like make this book count. If you're going to write it, make every word count. Put your heart and soul into this. It's a piece of art. It's not a disposable thing. It should have some permanence and gravitas to it. And I think it really benefits you to have someone in your corner to help you through that.
That's right. And, we have experience, and we're not the only ones, right? Other folks have experience as well. And we just got experience in creating beautiful books. And, speaking of beautiful books, Stephen Shapiro, who I'm going to ask him to hold up his book here in a moment. He of course loves the plug. It's an art. It's an art form, right? Graphic design. Everyone's heard the phrase, "The book looks self-published," and so what that really means is substandard cover design, which is a killer, substandard editorial, which is a killer. And so, if you're going to do this, do it in a thoughtful manner. Either work with somebody that can help you, or hire a specialist in every phase of the book production process, please.
Now, we often say that the speaking business is the intersection really of three distinct businesses. There's thought leadership, your message. There's performance skills. What do you do on stage? And then there's sort of the business of speaking. Essentially, it's a marketing and branding business. So it's like three things kind of squished into one makes for a successful speaking business. What are the macro elements that go together to make a successful book? I mean, obviously you have to have an idea for the book and a thesis. You're going to probably have a research phase. There's a writing phase. There's an editing phase. There's a marketing phase. But like, what are the different core elements that are assembled or that you help authors assemble in order to launch a successful book?
Sure. The two main elements I would say are the content and the market, right? And so a prerequisite is you must have great content. It must be something that is unique, timely, and well done. And of course, that varies from project to project. And then the other thing I always ask authors is, okay, great. You got this wonderful book idea. Who's going to give a shit? I think we could say that, right? Who's really going to care, right? And so if you're going to come back and tell me I've got a book that everyone's going to love, you haven't really thought about who your target market is. And so you have to know your target market. Yeah. So just to sum up, great content and know your target market.
What are the things that you notice these days that is maybe different than in the past? And I've been really studying this myself too. Maybe we may disagree even, but some of the things I'm working on hard on my new book. First of all, I'm trying to make it fun. So I feel that sometimes people's messages are serious, but you still can say it in a fun way. And there's almost an entertainment value that's required, same way it is on stage, by the way. So I'm almost thinking as I'm writing my new book, would someone listen to this on the treadmill? Would someone read it on a vacation? So it's, an element of fun. The other one I'm trying to use is rich detail. I'm trying to share, kind of put people in the scene the same way I would tell a rich detail story on the stage. And then the other element that I'm really focusing on is revealing surprising truths. In other words, if all I'm doing is repeating something that someone already knows, they don't really need to read my book. And so I like saying, hey, everything that you learned about the subject is wrong, and here's the new approach. And when I study other people, like start with why. So this, Simon Sinek, he said, hey, most companies do this, but the best ones do that. And that little pattern is actually really common in authors that are successful. Most people think X, but the truth is Y. Common knowledge is this, but I'm going to share with you why you should look at it as that. So the things that I've been tracking, Naren, are surprising truths, keeping it fun, upbeat, funny, high entertainment value, and a lot of rich details. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on those three, and then what would you add to that list in this day and age that will help make a book successful?
So right now we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we've gotten close to the finish line on 3 or 4 projects. And I've stopped 3 or 4 projects right at the finish line and said, hey, look, we have to do something to address the pandemic. And I don't care what industry you're in, what lane you're an expert in. This pandemic has impacted your content, and not address it in some form or fashion is a mistake, because there's going to be books out there that are not going to address it that really should have, and those books are going to be obsolete in short order. So in addition to the 3 things that you mentioned, and this is just top of mind for me right now, just really understanding, viewing the pandemic in a lens that's related to the current book that we're dealing with.
And on the same token, I assume we could overdo it, right? So if the entire book is, how do you survive a pandemic, but you want your book to have staying power, that insight is going to be perhaps out of date 7 years. I hope it's out of date 7 years from now. So is there a balance that we need to strike with respect to the current, making it a book that has an expiration date versus one that's will last the test of time?
Yeah, there is, and it varies from project to project, right? I mean, I think touching upon it is a minimum. I really do.
Yeah.
You're going to see a slew of books that are going to have COVID-19 in the title, and so you don't want to go too far, swing too far to that direction. But it's a balancing act, and it's something that we've had to deal with recently. So I raise that as a concern that a consideration that everyone should be thinking about.
So you've been involved in a lot of book projects, ones that you've in your company have led, and I'm sure you've have a real good understanding of the industry and authors that have done work outside of your firm. What are the 4 or 5 most common mistakes? What do authors do wrong that the folks on today's call can learn from and obviously avoid those pitfalls?
Yeah. So one that comes to mind is not taking the time on the concept development stage to really flesh out what it is that this book is all about. What is the big idea? So that's the first thing. And then beyond that, I've seen folks take shortcuts when it comes to the editing process. It is a process, and anytime you take a shortcut, the final product will suffer. So those are two. And then I mentioned the cover design earlier. That's so important, right? You really, of course, can judge a book by its cover. So those are the 3 things that come to mind, at least on a book production, the book production side of things. And then on the book marketing side, it's important to try 100 different things relative to book marketing. We're not going to know what of the 100 are actually going to work, but it's important to try all 100. And what works for one project may not work for another project. And so there's no magic bullet when it comes to book marketing and distribution. You just have to use best practices across the board and see what works.
I'd like to double click on that, on book marketing and publicity and such, because there are traditional things, you hire a publicist and ideally, you get on Good Morning America or something, but it's very different today, isn't it, than it was even a few years ago. I was speaking to the publisher of my friend Mel Robbins' book, and he was telling me that she literally got, maybe it was Good Morning America, some, national TV show. And she's on there and she was like all excited and she sold like 50 books. And then she was on a podcast from Lewis Howes, who's a very well-known podcaster, and she sold like 10,000 books from that one podcast episode. So some of the things that we think are the highest profile may or may not actually move books these days. So what are some of the things that you're seeing that are most effective in today's digital world that actually moves book volume?
Yeah, again, it's knowing your audience, right? I mean, if you're a thought leader and you're talking about a business book, sure, it'd be great to be on Good Morning America, but you have to ask yourself, like, why would they want you on Good Morning America? The audience doesn't care, right? And so again, knowing where your readers are, find the podcast that is talking about exactly what you're writing about. Find the blogger that's writing about exactly what you're talking about. Those are the relationships and the type of editorial coverage that's really going to move the needle. And these Hail Marys, sure, give it a try. They're not going to land. They're probably not going to land. And if they do, the results, as you mentioned, aren't what they used to be.
One other question on that front. Let's say I want to invest $100,000 to help promote my book. I say, whatever the publisher does, awesome, but I'm going to spend $100,000 of my after-tax dollars because I want to make this book successful. How would you advise me to spend? I know we haven't talked about the specifics of my book, but like, how would you advise me to spend that $100,000?
Okay, so this is post-publishing, as in you've got the book and you're ready to market the book.
Right, book is out or coming out in a month or whatever. How should I spend my $100,000 to market it?
Okay, one of the things we do a lot of is airport placement, and we work with Hudson News, and so for those of you that don't know, all that space is co-op, right? You gotta rent that space on that table. So that's one thing.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but just to pause, make sure people understood that. If your book is in Barnes & Noble, that's because some buyer at Barnes & Noble thought that your book might sell in that Barnes & Noble, and you don't pay to be in Barnes & Noble. But when you're in an airport and you walk by and you see a big display and you're like, wow, that author must be so successful or whatever, that is paid advertising space. Either the publisher or the author or some combination is paying to have your book sitting out for people walking in the airport to see. I just want to make sure everyone understood what you're talking about there.
Yeah, that's right. It is prime real estate, and although it's different the last 2 months, but particularly in the business and thought leadership space, that's I've seen great return on spending money in that manner. The other thing that we've actually had a lot of success with is Amazon AdWords. People, particularly for this space, right? Thought leadership books tend to sell on Amazon, just the way it goes. We can debate the merits of Amazon. I've got some personal feelings, which I won't get into right now about Amazon. But Amazon AdWords tend to work. You can put keywords in relative to your book. You can tie your book to other books that you want to emulate. or you think are good comps. And then the last piece, of course, is media outreach. And when I say media, it's more like editorial coverage outreach, trying to get the blogger, the podcaster. And this is a lot of work for the author that's both a speaker and maybe has another full-time gig. So if you can invest in a person or a firm to help you in that regard, it's probably well spent. Of course, check references and things like that, but those are the big things. And you probably got a couple thousand to spare.
Awesome. So moving on to timing.
Yeah.
Imagine that someone on the call here today has their book manuscript ready. They can hit the go button anytime. As you mentioned several times, we're in the middle of a bit of an oddball time with the COVID-19 crisis. Then we're coming up on an election cycle. Then we're coming up on a couple weeks after the election cycle. Whatever happens is going to be a pretty active couple weeks. Then we're coming up on holiday, which is hard to compete with Santa Claus. What are some thoughts that a thought leader on this call should consider in terms of timing of their book launch? They don't want to wait 10 years, obviously, but should we be getting a book out in August? Should we be getting a book out in middle of election season, in the middle of Christmas? Should we wait till next year? What are you advising your authors?
Well, first of all, I would say March was not a great month to release a book. And so Steven Shapiro actually came out in March. And so I want to make sure we give him a plug and give him an opportunity to hold up his book whenever you say, Josh, okay? Okay. It depends. So what do you have on your calendar, right? Do you have this big speaking gig? Do you have a conference? Do you have, a consulting gig? It varies from person to person. I can't tell you that there's some months that aren't great. Namely, I should say historically aren't great. July, August aren't the best months, but although now, given what's gone on, we're actually doing more launches in July and August than we've ever done, simply because we've pushed back some launches. So the answer is kind of twofold. We have historical months that are good for launches, and then the other part of it is like really understanding what's on your calendar. Where can you? When is the time of the year that you're more visible at conferences or speaking gigs?
Got it. That's super helpful. So I know that there's going to be a bunch of people on this call that have questions, and I want to give them the chance to do that. But before we open up to questions, I wanted to just you mentioned Steven Shapiro. Steven, I see you there in your thematically branded purple shirt. Bravo, Steven. What did we forget to add? What would you like to add to the conversation as someone who's literally gone through this process and also happened to have done so with Amplify?
Yeah, so I've done the commercial traditional publishing with 3 different publishers. I've done the self-publishing. I think a lot of it came down to me, working with Naren and the Amplify team, to a couple of different things. One was I didn't want a self-published book, so I'll just show. It's a gorgeous book that they created, hardcover. Some of the things that they did were just, I was never going to get Penguin to do color interior. And then the cool thing is there's actually a centerfold in the book. I ripped it out, but there's actually a centerfold in the book with a summary of the book. So I got to design the book on my terms rather than the publisher's terms. And if I look at all my traditionally published books, they're pretty low quality because they're just trying to pump them out. The other thing which is really important to me though, is I wanted a traditionally published quality book, but at the same time, I wanted to retain all the intellectual property. And that was, to me, a huge part of my decision, because we've taken the content and created so many different variations, whether it's videos and tools that the traditional publishers typically don't let you do. So I just wanted control. That for me was a big, big part of the conversation. And Naren and his team just knocked it out of the park.
That's awesome. Thanks, Stephen. And by the way, I've seen centerfolds before that don't look like what you just showed, but we'll leave that for a different time. No, kidding aside, what if you just went through this process? You worked very hard writing a book, which by the way is fabulous. Everyone should buy a copy. And you got it publishing, it's out the door. But if you could go back at the start of the project and you have one do-over, you can like wave your wand and do one thing differently, other than launching in March of 2020 in the middle of a pandemic. What's one thing that you would have done differently if you had the ability to go back and do it?
For this book, actually, I don't think there's a lot I would go back and do differently, other than maybe some of the tools. We were a little slow to bring some of the complementary tools, because I think if we look at the book as a means to other things and not just speaking, but what kind of digital assets can we create? What kind of subscription services can we create? We were it took us longer to get some of those things done. And I would like to have had everything ready when we launched. But in terms of marketing, in terms of the book itself, I thought we did a great job with it. And Naren and his team were, so useful for that.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Hey, Stephen, thank you very much. If I could just say one thing, Josh.
Sure.
Stephen's a great example of, he just took such an interest in every single word and every single cover design, all 50 cover designs that we worked on, right, Stephen? And so I tease him a little bit, but that is the cover that went through the process, and he was driving, he was steering, and at the end of the day, he had full approval rights, and of course, intellectual property rights as well, which is very important, not just for his book, but this overall product that he's rolling around it, product/service that he's rolling out around it.
Yeah, that's a really, just so everyone understands that, so there's the book itself, but then there's like, well, who has the rights to a book summary? Who has the rights to international business? Who has the rights to the audio book? Who has the rights if you want to make a college course out of it? Who has the rights if you want to make it a digital video game? And so, these are all things that would need to be negotiated, and there's not like a blanket answer to that, but these are things you should think about as you're bringing your book to life. Okay, so with that, what I'd love to do is open it up to questions. We have a raise hand feature, I think. Is that correct? Awesome. So it might be most helpful because we got a lot of people on the call. If someone has a question, maybe you can hit the raise hand feature and then we will unmute you and you can go for it. So Connor, who do we got up? By the way, Connor is here in the studio with me in Detroit and we are appropriately social distance. I'll just point that out. Although he's not wearing any PPE, we should talk about that after. You can also, by the way, if you'd rather not raise your hand, you can type into the Q&A bar. We can always see you as well. Okay, it looks like Ryan Folan has a question. Ryan, go for it. Oh, he doesn't.
No, I don't have a question, but if I did, I'm sure I would let you know. It looks like JP.
JP does. JP, you're up. Let's hear it.
Hey, great. I wasn't sure how to find the technology raise hand thing, so I just did the old school raise hand. That worked. I like it. This is cool. Thanks for hosting this. My question is around the use of a ghostwriter, plus minuses, and when you would use them, especially in your process, with doing the kind of hybrid model. Is that something you guys actually do and help with the ghostwriting, or is it something you might need to do yourself, or you don't take advantage of a ghostwriter when using your process? How does that work?
Yeah, we use ghostwriters in about, I would say, 50% of the books that we work on the Amplify side of our business. And, so I've worked with authors that are great writers. They're fine writers, but they're also, they're juggling their speaking gigs and their day jobs. And it's just oftentimes just more efficient to use a ghostwriter. If you don't have the time to spare, or just, the efficiencies of using a ghostwriter that can sort of guide you through the process. And then it just becomes as simple as talking to them, and that ghostwriter will turn what you've dictated into chapters for your review and approval. There's no stigma with using a ghostwriter. Some folks think that's cheating. It's not cheating. And so we also have a stable of ghostwriters that we call upon from project to project. When you employ a ghostwriter, that's when the process gets a little bit expensive. Because this person is writing on your behalf and it's a full-time effort for 2 or 3 months. So definitely use ghostwriters, part of our process.
Hey, JP, I'm just going to add to that real quickly. It's also not all or nothing. So you might think, and I know you were saying this, but some people might think, okay, if I use a ghostwriter, I just get interviewed and I do nothing in the book and they just hand me this finished book. But there's a lot of variation between writing it all yourself or writing none of it yourself. So I've heard the term writing partner used frequently. And so I think that the author has the individual amount of work that they choose to do and how they choose to use a partner in crime here or not. And that's a whole gradation. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah, that's right. So we're actually working with Paul Epstein, who I think is on this call. And Paul is using what we call a writing coach or a book doctor. And so Paul's doing all the writing, but he's just getting help from somebody in terms of the concept development and scoping out assignments for Paul just to keep him on his schedule. And it's working out beautifully. And
I agree. There absolutely should be no stigma in that whatsoever. Michael Jordan, who's been in the news a lot recently, he had a coach. Like everybody has a trainer, there's a professional athlete. Everyone, so I think we should remove the stigma. The goal is to get the best possible book out there. And why wouldn't you want to deploy whatever resources you can to make that happen?
So I write books and I use a ghostwriter. So there's no stigma.
Well, what's maybe the advice around lessons learned about using a ghostwriter? How do you select one? How do you work with one best? It sounds like, hey, good to use one, and half cases the more you do. What are kind of the lessons learned about getting that right?
So there's two components. Number one, you want somebody who's extremely talented in terms of the technical aspects of writing, right? Somebody who's got preferably somebody who's got in genre expertise. Somebody, if you're want to write a business book, somebody should have written a business book. So that's the first piece of it, the technical piece of it. Then the other piece of it is personality fit. You got to make sure, ideally, I advise folks to have a meeting, a physical meeting at the start of the process. Of course, that's not possible now. And then after that, you can go your separate ways and do everything remotely. So technical expertise and personality fit.
Cool. Other questions?
A couple questions in the chat. One question from Jamie about middle publishing. Maybe ask her if she has something specific about it. She wants to learn more.
Sure. So Jamie, did you have something specific around middle publishing? Do you want to unmute and share what you had?
Yeah, I just missed the beginning of our talk because I had some technical issues and had to deal with that. So I missed finding out exactly what Amplify does and how you mentioned it's a middle ground between self-publishing and publishing companies. And if you could just exemplify on that a little bit more, like what does that actually mean?
We're going to just, in the interest of time, because I want to make sure other people get questions, we'll send you the recording, Jamie, but essentially there's commercial publishing on one end, there's total raw self-publishing on the other, and where Amplify sits is in the middle, which is hybrid publishing, and we'll shoot you over the recording right when this is done.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
And then Janice Brower, you have a question.
Audiobooks and how that fits in with your
I
process.
do. Can you comment on audiobooks and how that fits with your process? We're seeing a lot of momentum in that space, and just curious what you'd have to say on that. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're seeing a significant uptick in audiobooks right now. And that is one of the mediums that we publish in addition to physical books, ebooks, audiobooks. And so when we're talking about audiobook, we've got two options. Number one, you get a professional narrator to narrate the book. Option number two is the author narrates. So just generally, the popularity of audiobooks is increasing. The popularity of ebooks has flattened, if not slightly down. And believe it or not, the popularity of physical books is slightly up.
That's fascinating.
Pamela's asking, what's the cost for working with a hybrid publisher?
Great. So I was going to ask you that question too. Pamela's asking this question, but Naren, can you walk us through maybe a tip, like what are the different components, and maybe give us a range? You don't have to give us like a price quote, but like if an author wants to work with you and you feel that the fit is right, and so you both agree to team up, how, maybe walk us through what is the range or what are the various costs? Because in the hybrid model, essentially, and back to Jamie, your question, the author is funding some of that project. Now, the author is going to hopefully get that back and more in terms of royalty. And again, even in advance with a commercial publisher, you still have to pay it back. But the author is taking on some economic risk by funding some of this project. And Naren, can you just walk us through at a high level what that might look like?
Sure. So we talked about ghostwriting. And so if we bring a ghostwriter on board, that's the one variable that there's just a wide range, right? We work with ghostwriters that charge $20,000, $25,000 per book. We've also worked with ghostwriters that charge six figures and up for a book. And the big determining factor is, do they have best-selling credits under their name, in genre expertise? So I know that's not very helpful, but the range is really that wide. And then the other line item costs include things like copy editing, proofreading, cover design, and then the actual construction of the book itself. And so just generally speaking, if you take the ghostwriting out of the equation, most of our projects end up somewhere between the $20,000 to $50,000 range.
Got it. That's super helpful. Good.
When reaching out to outlets, do you advise doing it personally or have a PR firm or rep do it for you?
Oh, good. Yeah, the question was, when reaching out to outlets, do you advise the author reaching out to him or herself, or working with a publicist or PR firm to add more credibility?
So when you say outlets, I think of two things. The first is retail. And if we're talking about retail, I think it's always better to have the publishing house reach out to one of the large retailers, right? Be it Barnes & Noble or Books A Million or Hudson. Now, if we're talking about the independent bookshop in your neighborhood, it's quite charming when the author goes in and pitches their book, and they're very receptive to that. So that's on retail. On other opportunities, what I call bulk sale opportunities, let's say you're involved, we've been working on a lot of political books lately. Let's say you're involved with a particular grassroots political organization. If you're a member and you're active in it, you should do the reaching out because you've got that connection with that organization. And the same holds true with speaking gigs and trying to negotiate your fees with books. And I know there's different ways to do that. That's something that you will want to do on your own. And one last thing I'll say is, when it comes to book distribution, there are just a few distributors that probably have 90% of the distribution pie. The big one is Ingram Book Distributing, and so Ingram we work with, and what they do is they have an account with just about every place that sells a book in America. And so that's one advantage of working with somebody like us. We can just add your book to our master agreement with Ingram, and just like that, your book is available at all these outlets. That doesn't mean that your book would be stocked in all these outlets, and but that is a possibility.
Can you walk us through, just when we're talking about book sales, the economics of a single unit? So let's say I have a book and my book retails for $24.95 and I'm expecting it to sell for $20, just keeping simple math. So what is the anatomy of that $20 from the time someone pays $20? How does it flow through to the retailer or Amazon or you or the author or who produced the book? Like, help us understand that $20.
Okay, sure. So if you sell a book on Amazon, I love them in some respects and I hate them in other respects. So what Amazon does is they buy from us at 55% off the cover. That's a huge discount, right? And so that's Amazon and most retail outlets, really. If the retail price of that book is $24.95, you'll notice if you go on Amazon right now, that $24.95 book is probably selling for, call it $20, right? And so while they'll buy it at 55% off the cover price, their game is to undercut the competition, and they work on thin margins, but they have massive amount of the book sales. So that's one outlet. Another outlet is direct to consumer sales. Those are amazing because if the book is retailing for $24.95, you get $24.95. That's not really scalable in most instances. But if you have an opportunity to sell books at the back of the room, I urge folks to take it. Now, there's some pros and cons with direct-to-consumer sales and non-Amazon, non-retail sales. Most notably, folks are sometimes hung up on achieving bestseller status. Now, there's some sales that count in the bestseller status rankings and some sales that don't. The ones that do are Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Hudson, CEO Reads. So if that is a consideration for you and your book, you want to definitely try to sell more books through those channels than either direct to consumer or there's a third option, and that is directing folks to your website, which I think is a great idea because in addition to getting them onto your website to buy your book, they're gonna go on your website and learn a little bit about you. And maybe you can sell them something else or just inform them about who you are and what you stand for. So those are the three main buckets.
So let's unpack that just for a second. So one thing I heard loud and clear, I just want to make sure everyone else heard, is that there may be a conflicting interest. If someone's goal is to get on the bestseller list, you're going to want to sell every book and have it count toward getting on a list. However, that's not the most economically beneficial to you as the author. The most economically beneficial to you as the author is you sold the book at the back of a speech or off of your website. So there's a little push and pull there, and that's an individual choice that people can make. There's no right or wrong answer. That's individual. But let's just take a look at a single unit. Let's just say in theory, I sell a book at the back of the room. Let's say I publish a book through, let's say Steven Shapiro, make it better. Steven Shapiro sells a book at the end of a speech. And let's say he gets $20 in his pocket for that book. Does he keep all $20? Probably not. Like, you had to actually print the book and you probably get something because you're the publisher. Like, how does that $20 split? Not, they don't have to give me his deal, but like just in general, how should we look at that $20?
Okay, so one of the things that we haven't touched on is the back end on sales and royalty splits. Under the hybrid model, authors are contributing to the production-related costs. However, on the back end, where we sell through our retail distribution, we keep 15% and send our clients 85%. So because you're assuming more of the risk on the front end, you're going to get the lion's share on the back end.
So just so I understand, after the costs of the producing the book are done, you as the publisher are having 15%, the author is having 85%. And that's
right.
very different than, for example, a commercial author, a large commercial publisher. What's that split generally more look like?
It's inverted.
It's inverted.
Yeah. So the author would get 15% and the house would get 85%.
Okay, so super clear. If there's $10 of profit after Amazon, Jeff Bezos get rich and all other stuff, the book is produced, there's $10 sitting there. In a traditional model with a large publisher, you, the author, get $1.50 and the publisher gets $8.50. If you're working with the middle tier, the hybrid model, it's inverted. So you get $8.50 and the publisher gets $1.50. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay. And then I should also clarify one thing. Direct to consumer sales at a speaking gig back of the room, we don't keep any of that. That's 100% for the author. Our business is when we actually participate and succeed selling a book, that's when we keep our 15%.
Okay, so if you're the one selling the book through retail or whatever else, or through your site, you keep 15%. But if the author sells it at the back of a speech or off of their website, you don't get 15%, you get 0%. You had to produce the book, but beyond the cost of producing the book, the author keeps 100% of the royalty.
Yeah, that's right.
Sweet. All right, cool. What other questions do we have? You could raise a physical hand. You can do a digital hand, whatever's good for you guys. All right, we got Julia.
How meaningful or important?
Yeah, I had a question.
Go ahead, Julia.
Want to be a bestseller versus not a bestseller? How important is that for selling your book to be able to identify, or how important is that for being booked for speaking to have? I mean, I've heard like on Amazon, if you get all of your friends and their friends to buy the book on the same day, you can say you're an Amazon bestseller. I mean, there's tricks to it. How important or significant is that in selling books or in getting booked to be a speaker?
I'll answer from a speaking standpoint, and then Naren, you can pick it up from a book sales standpoint. From a speaking standpoint, I think it's helpful to say that you're a bestseller because often speeches are booked on the basis of fear. And so that sort of like makes them feel more comfortable with you. But keep in mind, there's a real variety of bestseller. So if you're an Amazon bestseller because you and a bunch of your friends all bought the same book in an hour, that's a very different thing than being on the other end of the spectrum, which is a New York Times bestseller, which is that's the gold standard. So some of the other lists, like if you're a Wall Street Journal bestseller, it's still cool. Like you're a best-selling author. That's a great thing, but it still doesn't have quite the cachet of a New York Times bestselling. So that's the gold standard. It's also the hardest to achieve. You have to have a lot of book sales, and we don't have time to explain all of it. That being said, I think overall in the speaking industry, that continues to have a decreasing impact in speaking decisions. Like it's helpful. If you're a New York Times bestselling author, that's an extra check box, and that will help. But it's not the only thing. It's not like that alone is going to sell speeches. So I think in the broader sense of why someone is going to hire you, it's a factor, but it's decreasing in terms of the importance of that factor. And Naren, how does it affect book sales?
Yeah, so you said it correctly. New York Times is the gold standard. It's the list that everyone wants to get on that very few people can actually get on. So, I get people coming to me and wanting to know how they can get on New York Times bestseller. So I can just say, just generally speaking, you got to be able to sell 10,000 books in a week's time. That's hard to do, right? There are other lists that are more achievable, Wall Street Journal, Publishers Weekly. And then let's talk about Amazon. Amazon is fantastic in that they've got many, many bestsellers. You can be a bestseller in a genre, subgenre, and subgenre. It doesn't matter. That little yellow ribbon, it still says bestseller. So I think it's a nice to have. I don't know that I'd necessarily get caught up in that too much, but one of our strategies that we employ with Amazon is we'll put the book in two categories that make perfect sense, and then we'll put the book in a third category that is not as competitive, and just to give folks a better opportunity to get that yellow ribbon that says bestseller.
Cool. Any other questions from the gang? Mallory. Hey, Mallory, how you doing?
Good, thanks. Yeah, just a quick question. So we've heard of people starting off self-publishing and then getting picked up by a publisher. Is that something that Amplify does, or do you have to start with Amplify from the get-go?
Yeah, and so when we say hybrid, one of the features that's most like self-publishing is the fact that the author has creative control and intellectual property control. So, and we've actually had this happen before. So if somebody publishes with us and then something happens and then they get this enormous offer from a large house, they're free to take it. And actually, we've actually helped folks get that sort of arrangement if that's, again, what you want.
What about the other way, though? I think she was asking, like, if she self-published this afternoon on Amazon and it was, but it got all the momentum. And then would you say, like, oh, she was so successful self-publishing, now you as Amplify want to take her on?
Sure. We've done that as well. There's some hurdles to overcome. Every title has an ISBN that's associated with the title. And so, if we take a book that was previously self-published and republished it, we'd have to republish it with a different ISBN. And sometimes that means you lose reviews. You have to sort of start the distribution process anew. But we've done it before, but there are some logistical hurdles to consider.
I think and it's very helpful. I would just really encourage everybody here, if you're really serious about writing a book, you should explore all three options and weigh carefully the merits, the pros and cons of each. We're happy to talk to you and give you an objective opinion. I'm sure you have other friends and colleagues, everyone on this call. And I don't think there's one size fits all for everybody. There's successful people in all three categories. I think we have time for one more question. I really appreciate, Naren, your participation, everyone joining and staying with us. Let's see, who do we have? Kind of hard to see on my little screen here. Connor? No questions. Hey, all right.
I actually have a question, which is more about ghostwriting and publishing.
Go ahead.
Particularly, so my situation is I have a topic which I've been told is amazing. I cannot write myself. I can barely speak. But on top of that, ideally, I would love to find somebody to work with who can get all the information from me and then dress it up and make it into a topic that becomes a book, a speech, an audiobook, and everything else. Who would I work with for something like that? Not just the writer, because I tried working with two separate ghostwriters and they just write how I say and it just doesn't come out well. I need somebody who can take what I say and make sense of it.
So, that is what a good ghostwriter is supposed to be able to do, right? And so perhaps there just wasn't a good fit in the two previous ghostwriters that you worked with. We've started projects that from keynote speeches and turned them and expanded and turned them into full book projects. And I'm sure, Josh, you can talk about just the opposite, right? Where you take a book and you pick out pieces that turn into a keynote speech. So, I'm happy to have a chat with you offline and
I would love that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the answer is if you have your thought leadership, your content, and it's great, then it certainly has to be adapted to different medium. So in the same way that you read a book and then the book is adapted to become a TV movie or an actual feature film, there's some adaptation as you jump from one media to the next. That being said, if the core of your content is good and solid, that should be a good foundation. So perhaps you guys can connect afterward. So I know we're running out of time. I know everybody has other things. Before I say thanks to everybody, Naren, how can people learn more about Amplify? Who should they contact if they want to speak with someone directly?
Sure. So you can go to amplifypublishing.com and read more about us. You can send me an email. It's Naren, Naren, at mascotbooks.com. Mascot Books is our parent company, mascotbooks.com. There is a submission form on amplifypublishing.com. If you have any questions, we're here just to answer questions, right? Happy to give you the benefit of my 17 plus years experience in this field.
We really, really appreciate you guys joining the call and sharing in such a transparent way. I think we've all learned a lot. I'll just end by saying that I want to continue to wish everybody healthy and safety above everything else. That being said, just real quickly on the speaking business, we're seeing increased momentum on this end. It's not the days of 6 months ago yet. Obviously, there's still a lot of concerns, but we are seeing momentum. There's more demand for virtual, of course, but we're seeing in-person deals being floated around. We're booking stuff for the fall. So I just want to encourage everybody. I know our business is like the screeching record to a halt. But I really am optimistic that it's going to come back strong. I think we're going to get a lot of people with cabin fever, sick of being hibernated. They're going to want to get people together to do business. And I'm really optimistic that 2021 is going to be a great year for the speaking business. So if you're as frustrated as I'm sure we have been in this time, please stay strong, keep the long game in mind. And I think all of us have a very bright future ahead in the world of professional speaking. Amplify friends, thank you. Ring Circus friends, thank you. Stay safe and stay strong.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.